So thank you for the introduction, Radha. So I just want to say, first of all, it's really great to be with all of you again.
Yeah, we're super glad to be doing this topic. Something I'm really keen on speaking about. So thank you for inviting us to speak about it.
Cool. So I guess maybe to begin, we'll just say a couple of words. And I mean, it's interesting in the year or so that we've had, what we're also seeing is a number of increases in certain areas in life. And one of them is some challenges around relationship. And you can kind of play out the scenario. People are in the same household, in their normal interactions, they would spend some time together, but they can go out, they can socialize, they can go to the office, etc. And then with the circumstance of the last year, people are in some ways forced to kind of spend more time and be more present with other people. And what this can do is really bring out the strengths, or let's say the areas of development in that particular relationship. So this presentation is called The Art of Relationship. We want to share, I guess, a couple of things, maybe our own experiences, but also our own insights and things that we've picked up on our journey of Bhakti, because it's amazing that the Bhakti tradition, the Bhagavad Gita, etc., Bhagavatam, has so much phenomenal insight on relationship, because ultimately, we're all longing for that perfect relationship. And that is why it's such a key consideration, literally across the globe, across cultures, across generations as well. So we look forward to your questions, and yeah, let's see how we go. So Radha, do you want to break it down for us?
Definitely. I have a number of questions which were already sent to us before the call even started tonight. One of the first ones that we had was, what is the case Krishna conscious? What is the Krishna conscious emphasis on astrology in relationships? They've said, I have heard both arguments for and against astrology. Is it a recommended tool?
Do you want to take that, or should I?
You can start.
Okay, so it's a very good question. So let me just give a context, because I think we also have people who are on the call who may not be so familiar. But in the tradition of Krishna consciousness or Bhakti yoga, one of the things that's spoken of is how when a couple are looking to get married, the essence of it is that they should be coming together to help one another in their spiritual growth, in their personal development. And what can help this to work really well is that the couple are compatible in nature. There's a misconception, unfortunately, in the modern world, that anyone can easily make a relationship work with anyone. Now, it is true if someone is very selfless, right? That means you go into the relationship, you have no agenda, you have no needs. But then, to be honest, generally, that's not the case. Generally, we go into relationships because we do want something. We do have certain expectations, we do have certain needs, and that's normal. So what the Vedic literatures do is says, look, let's be real about it, right? You have a certain kind of personality. There's certain things which you have a strong desire to experience in life. Now, once that's understood, you've got two choices. Choice number one, which unfortunately many people do in modern society, is I know what I want, and I'm just going to get with anyone, and then they should bend to my desires. Now, it's funny. Why? Because even we can't change some of the things about ourselves that we want to change. So the idea that I'm going to marry anyone I want and they should adjust whatever they're like to suit me, if you look at it, it's just like that. It just doesn't make any sense. So the Vedic literatures are very real. They say, look, you have a certain type of character, okay? And you have a certain type of aspiration in life. Fine, right? That's real. Let's be honest about it. Therefore, rather than just being with anyone and then becoming miserable and making them resentful because you need to force them to change for your desires to also work out, rather than doing that, why not just find someone whose desires are connected to yours? Now, it's not that all desires will ever be exactly the same, no, right? But if there's some key things that you have in common and that you're both looking for, then you're going to have less arguments. There's going to be less resentment. You're going to have more common ground. There's going to be more understanding between the two of you, right? And interestingly enough, what also tends to happen, and there's external studies on this, by the way, I can send an article. There was an article in the Huffington Post about this similar principle. So what also happens according to the Vedas is if the husband and wife have similarities in nature, not only does it mean that they're more likely to get along because they've got some genuine common ground, but also it's more likely that the children that they will have will also be quite integrated in their character. So what happens, and this is why the Vedas are so powerful, it gives you an insight that you can't get empirically. So if there's a real harmony between the husband and wife, the child that's born in that union is more likely, it's not absolute because there are other factors or variables, but that child is more likely to also be quite harmonious within themselves because they're carrying the energy of the mother and the energy of the father. So if the energy of the mother and father are quite together, then because the child is carrying both of those energies, that child will also, as a default, be quite together. Now, of course, if they go through bad experiences in their life, that can derail it. There may be other factors, but it gives them a greater tendency to be quite harmonious within themselves because the people that gave birth to them were quite harmonious between themselves. Do you understand?
Yeah, and it's also important to add as well that, I mean, because sometimes people say things like, oh, I know this couple that, oh, you know, they're like chalk and cheese, they're so opposite, or, you know, they argue all the time or something, but they're still together and they've been together for a really long time. So the thing about astrology is, yeah, it does indicate the sense of compatibility between two people. At the same time, we still have to act properly in the relationship. Yeah. So astrology and two people being compatible is like, if you want to make a cake, you can get the very best ingredients for the cake. You know, you're going to get the two really wonderful compatible natures of yourself and the person. Using astrology can help you to understand that. At the same time, you still need to combine, you still need to follow the recipe. Exactly. So you still need to actually follow the principles of how to have a healthy relationship, how to communicate in the best possible way with your partner, how to be sensitive to their needs, how to appreciate your own needs, and that whole balance. So we still need to act properly, and that can also make a huge difference in relationships.
Yeah, so just to kind of add to that, if that's okay. So it's just like compatibility is like having the right ingredients in the kitchen, right? So if you have the right ingredients, okay, I want to make a cake, I want to make something tasty, great. Do I have the right ingredients to make something tasty? So compatibility shows, okay, these ingredients can be put together to create something tasty. These two people can come together to create something tasty. Now the question is, do you know how to cook? So therefore what happens is, and this is really important, this is why I love the Vedic teachings, because it gives you a deeper perspective. Many people jump to the wrong conclusions from experience. Experience alone will not always give you the right conclusion because you're always making some inference from experience. So a few scenarios. You have sometimes a couple, they're compatible, but they don't behave towards each other properly. Right? They often have the misconception that because we're compatible, I can now be lazy. You can't be lazy in a relationship. Just because you're compatible doesn't mean that, you know, you can just sit on your backside all the time and expect that everything's going to be wonderful. No. So some people, they're compatible, but they don't behave properly towards each other.
Yeah, it's like the compatibility means that you've got a good situation to start off with, but then you still need to act properly to actually get yourself to the goal of a healthy relationship.
Exactly. So some people are in one sense. Another interesting thing is people who are not compatible, but they're very dutiful, right? So you also get that combination. People who are not compatible, but they're very dutiful. So they've been brought up in a culture and they've been trained and they've seen their parents and grandparents who are just very dutiful. So even though they don't necessarily feel so much excitement about the relationship, because they've been trained to be very dutiful, they will just act properly and stick it out. So that's there. I guess the caution is that kind of person is quite rare, you see? Because nowadays, let's be honest, most people aren't brought up in a background or society where people you just taught to be very dutiful and do the right thing. It doesn't matter how the other person behaves.
Yeah, we really have to be honest in that sense. I mean, how much are we capable of doing something because it should be done, even if we're not getting any sort of taste or enjoyment from it?
Yeah, exactly. So one side is people compatible but don't act properly. The other side is people who are not compatible, but they're very dutiful. That can also last. But the ideal is that you have two people, and this compatibility, let's define it. It's similar values, right? So similar nature meaning similar values, the way people want to live. And let's say, for example, to make it very, very practical for you, you sometimes see people who are on the spiritual path. And I'm sure many of you who know people who are on the spiritual path, there's great variety amongst those people. You have some people on the spiritual path, they want to live very simply, right? I don't want to have a big high-flying career. I want to live very simply, just enough to maintain myself, and I want to spend all of my time doing direct, let's say, spiritual activities, going to the spiritual, places, etc. Wonderful. But you can have someone else who's also spiritually inclined, and they may want to dovetail their career. They may want to do lots of projects. So whatever it is, you can be spiritual in a number of different ways, and that's fine. But the thing is to be honest about it. A simple example, what happens if a couple get together and it's all romantic? One of them, from young, they actually really did not want to have kids. They may have seen in their upbringing that their parents had trouble with them, and they just really had no desire for it whatsoever. And the other has always been dreaming of having a big family. Now, because early on they weren't honest about what they really expect, they just thought, oh, because we love each other, we'll work it out. What they really mean is, because my partner loves me, she or he's going to do what I want. That's what they actually mean. And then later on, when these things come up, it's like, well, I don't want to have kids. What do you mean? But I want to have kids. Well, but if you love me, you would just like let go of that because I don't want to have kids. But if you love me, you would let go of your desire and do what I want. And if those desires are really strong, now you've just set yourself up for additional tension. And let's be honest, like some of these things are deep, right? The person who really has wanted a family for years, has been thinking about having their own kids. Now, if they're hitched and then they find out after marriage that their partner doesn't want kids, it's a big thing. And this is why often modern relationships fail, because people aren't honest about what they really, and it's not just a nice wish. It's something that's really deep. This is something that's non-negotiable. I really want this. So then,
and that's where compatibility also that's where it really helps, because then you'll have certain assumptions about life. You'll have certain sun scars or impressions from your upbringing. That means that you'll have certain value set, and the other person being compatible will have the same assumptions about life. So then it's just easier. It just makes that communication easier, and the less speed bumps you'll hit on the way.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing. Therefore, we're not saying that you should necessarily run out and go to all these astrologers. I'm not saying that necessarily. But what I would say is at least understand the essence. You should make sure that you try to get a sense of who you are and what your values are and what you're really attached to. And don't be shy about it. Don't pretend. Better to just be like, okay, I know what I'm looking for in a partner. Now, you won't get everything. Let's be real about that. You won't get everything that you're on your list. So you should know what things you're prepared to negotiate and what things are really, I've got a really strong need for this, and then you create an environment where you and the other person can be honest, and you do it early before you become attached. Because what happens when people become really attached is that they think, okay, I'll just say whatever the person wants to hear, so that we can get married. And then after marriage, I know I said that I was happy to do this, but you know what? I'm not happy about that. Yeah. Then the other person feels that they've been cheated. They feel, oh, but you told me that you were okay with this. I know I said I was okay, but I changed my mind, or I wasn't sure. And so, and then what's happened is you've now planted a bit of a seed that this person's lied to me, or this person's manipulated me. All of these things could be avoided if people are honest. And that means that in essence, two things: similar values, similar nature, similar aspirations, and treat the other person properly. Yeah. Don't think that there's no point of being lazy. Yep. Compatibility doesn't mean you're going to have a great marriage. It doesn't mean that at all. Unless you still also behave properly in the relationship, you'll still have troubles. Yeah.
Thank you for that really in-depth answer to that question. I've just been told that I think we have Vishaka Mataji on the call tonight as well. So we feel really fortunate. Thank you, Mataji, for joining the call tonight. Moving on to our next question. This is one that a number of people have asked tonight. And the question is, are there any practical ways that we can make a relationship which is genuinely God-centered in Krishna consciousness?
So yeah, I can answer. So relationships is genuinely God-centered. So you can see the other person as, you can see them as someone that you're meant to serve. You know, so you've got a mentality of not trying to gain or take from the relationship, but actually trying to serve. And the best way to do it is to understand the underlying principles of relationship, and seeing the other person as someone who has been sent into our lives, who's been there to communicate with us in a way which is very, very devotional and is going to bring us close to Krishna. So if we have that mood of being a servant, then that will really help us to have a proper attitude towards the other person, and that will naturally involve Krishna more in relationship as well.
Yeah. I'll just add that so there's a book called Spiritual Warrior 2 by Bhakti Swami, who's my spiritual mentor, and he talked about seeing our partner as a gift from God. And the idea being that if I see my partner as a gift from God, then it's not just this person belongs to me and I can do whatever I want. It's actually they belong to the Supreme, and therefore I have to deal with them in the way that Krishna or the Supreme would be pleased. So if we have that mentality that our partner is a gift from God, then we deal with them in the way that Krishna is happy. So we want to encourage each other, and it's very powerful because the energy that we give out in life is what comes back to us. So really, it's such a no-brainer. The more that we deal with each other in a loving way, not sentimentally. It's when there's love, there's also honesty, right? So it's an honest give and take, definitely. Like that. It's an honest give and take in the relationship. But when we do that, then you become stronger as a result. So you don't lose out in having that mood that we're serving each other. It's not one way. It's not like, the wife serves the husband and that's it. No, the husband is as much a servant of the wife as the other way around. Both are in that mood of service, and it helps every situation. But I would add, the one thing is you try to find someone who wants to have that kind of relationship. What you don't want is that it's one-sided, whereby one person wants to serve and the other person just wants to take. Then it becomes problematic.
And also, what helps to keep us in that mood of service is if we're taking responsibility for our own enthusiasm in our spiritual lives and life in general. So then if we're feeling nourished in our spiritual practices, or nourished in the indirect devotional service we perform through our work, and that will help us to feel much more energized and positive, and that will help us to stay in a much more giving mood in the relationship. So it's really important to have a good sadhana projects in Krishna consciousness which we really are inspired by, kind of maybe ideally a job situation which is also compatible with us, that we feel very enthusiastic about, and all of this will bring all of this positivity and enthusiasm will bring all of this to the relationship as well. So we'll be much more in the mood of giving and not taking.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, please.
And that is that what happens often in relationships, that people are getting into a relationship expecting the other person to make them happy. And that's a heavy responsibility to put on another person. You see, so that it doesn't quite work that way. The best relationships are ones where you have your relationship, your partnership, but that the people in the relationship, they also have time with their friends. They also have relationships with their seniors, juniors, etc. They're not expecting the other person to be everything for them, because it doesn't work. It's unrealistic. It's a burden, and it then means that actually we're just trying to draw from the other person. And so often you have two people who are acting like thieves. So I'm going to come to the relationship. All right, now come on, make me happy. Come on, do something. Make me laugh. And that's a downward spiral. Rather, as Bhakti Gamya was saying, we try to also energize ourselves. We get that energy from each other, but we also get it from other sources, our chanting, etc. So when we're connected, especially when we're connected to Krishna, then we're receiving, and because we're receiving, we have also more to give. And it's a continuous flow. So we continue to receive, and because we continue to receive, we continue to be able to give. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we have another question, which is sort of building off the idea of expectations before getting into a relationship. But the question is, what are some of the important things to consider before getting into a relationship? And I guess, what are some questions that we should all be asking ourselves and the partner?
I'm trying to think what questions you asked me. You're going to start.
Important questions to ask. Yep, so that's a really good question. So we should really start with being very, very genuine. This is going back to something my husband said at the beginning, like very, very genuine about what our values are. What is our value system? Like, what is it that makes us feel enthusiastic in life? What are we aspiring towards? What do we value? Because one, that will help us to find a partner who's very similar to that, and that should be like on our list of things that we're looking for. Do we want a partner are we very professional? You know, do we want a partner who's also very professional? Maybe someone who works in the corporate field. Are we very academic? Then do we want a partner who's also quite intellectual and academic? Are we very much into you know, gaining finances, resources? Do you really want a big house? Therefore, do you want a partner who's also inspired by that? Or do you want to live a life where just really a very simple life, or really engaging in the arts? And therefore, we also want to find a partner who's also into that. So again, it's very important to come back to our own personal value systems, and then seeing, okay, who could fit with that kind of value system that I have. Another thing that's really important to consider is the background, you know, what our family situation, and being really honest about that, because likelihood is, if maybe if you're from more of the Indian background, then maybe you have got a big extended family, and therefore it is genuinely really important for especially if you've grown up with your family, they've really played a large part in your life, and it's really important to have a partner who's going to be able to fit into that family situation. So then you want to be introducing that partner, or considering how well that prospective partner will fit into your family situation, and being really honest about it. If you're from more of a Western background, and there isn't that same large extended family, so maybe less of a consideration. I will say, in our own personal situation, you know, my husband's parents are from Ghana, my parents are also from Ghana. So when it comes to family functions, for me, if his parents are having family function and then I come, it's like, well, I'm very much used to this kind of environment. So it just means that there's less cause for issues, struggles, or difficulties in a relationship when the value systems are very much aligned. So the value system, the family, and also age is an important consideration. Yeah, it's an important consideration.
Yeah, so like I try and avoid the family gatherings, but that's another story. We'll talk about it another time. So like we talked about some of the things to really be honest about. So children, like that, right? So career. What tends to happen is, if let's say you're very well educated, you want to have let's say you want to have lots of very intellectual, philosophical discussions with someone, then you marry someone who's going to be able to do that. What you don't want is, I want to have these very kind of deep philosophical discussions. This person's really not into that, you know? And so then it becomes an issue, because what the issue is actually your communication, you know? Because then what you're into, that person, it causes that person to switch off, and what they're into, you have absolutely no interest in. Now, it's one thing in the honeymoon period, and that's a big thing also. What happens is, in the honeymoon period, that does not determine the quality of the relationship in marriage, because honeymoon is an artificial period. I'll explain how. You're seeing each other, you know, you've got your own place, he's got his own place. You see each other at the times when you feel like seeing each other. right? And then you go back to your own place. So just saying, oh, it's really nice in the beginning. Yeah, because you guys only see each other every now and then. Living with someone is different to the kind of period before you actually, tie the knot. So it's not just a question of how, oh, he made me laugh, or she made me laugh, whatever it is. It's a bit deeper. So asking those questions are really key. And as Bhakti Gamya was saying, if you have a strong attachment to your family, fine, no problem. In fact, extended families it's wonderful when people can be part of that, because it provides so much additional support and care and guidance if it's done properly. But then you have to be honest about that, and therefore, okay, I'm attached to my family. I want to see them regularly. So I want to make sure that the person I marry is also happy to be in that situation. Not that whenever I go to see my family, they're upset and they're grumpy, because in their eyes, we don't spend time with extended family. I don't spend time with my family at all. I just want to be, me and you. So it's just, again, being very real. And I'll just add before, sorry, actually,
no, please.
So one of the things you can do is when you have a sense of what you think would work for you, also bounce off people who love you. It's so amazing how your friends and family, they've seen you grow up, they've seen you for years. They can say, you know what, I think you do well with this kind of person, or yeah, I'm not sure if that kind of person will be a good match for you, and again, the thing is you have to ask them early, and you have to put them in a position where you're genuinely open for what they really think. If you give the impression that don't you dare say it's a bad idea because I'm attached now, then they may just back off and think, you know what, I'm not going to say anything because I think she or he's made their minds up, and if I say anything, I'll be the bad guy. So it's, again, about being real and about having some of those honest exchanges. The article in the Huffington Post that I mentioned earlier, they did a study, and it was a study of couples who'd been married for a long period of time, like decades, and were happily married. And the study was to try and find out what was it that they were doing that other people weren't doing. And I can send the link to the article if people want that. And there was two things that were mentioned in the article. One is that they had similar values, which is what we were talking about in terms of compatibility. They also made a very interesting point, which comes up in pop culture. They said, yes, opposites do attract, right? But they don't stay together, right? So it creates the sense, opposites do attract, and so it's a curiosity about what it's like, someone who's very different from me, but that doesn't necessarily work over a long period, you see? And that's the trick. So that whole thing of opposites attract, if people are very, very different, so if someone is very outgoing and they marry someone who's very, introverted, then whenever the outgoing person wants to go out and socialize, which they want to do, and they do because it gives them energy, then that same thing that gives that person energy will be exactly the same thing that drains their partner. So if they drag their partner along, he or she is getting drained while they're becoming more energized, and vice versa. The partner wants to spend all the time at home, and that person spending time just at home and not socializing, they're getting drained while the other one's getting energized.
Yeah, and we can, and the reason why we want that sense of compatibility or enthusiasm with similar things is because if we're getting drained when our partner's getting energized, we're going to have to actually strain ourselves or somehow push ourselves to do something which our partner wants to do. And so we can do that for some short time, but you can't push yourself for like a whole relationship. And also when children come into a relationship, then or a lot of attention focus will go onto them, and then you'll have less energy to keep pushing yourself and straining yourself for the relationship. So that compatibility means there's a much easier baseline to start off with, much less issues.
I guess the only other thing we'll add is that if one is already married in that situation, then it's still good to do the best you can to make it work. And but especially as one is more on the spiritual path, they can gain a certain strength. We call it spiritual strength, a certain joy by their connection with Krishna, and in that way they can evolve and grow as well. But let's be honest, in the modern age, we've all grown up with this, right? The smartphone and technology. What that does is it actually has an effect on the mind. We're the generation that are used to things being done instantly, right? I remember I was at university, and before the smartphone, before mobile phones came out, And that's, I've seen over years what it does. So because we're used to things being instant, the default for people is to be less tolerant, right? It's like, oh my God, you know, the website took 5 whole seconds to load. My God, it's like I was pulling my hair out, you know? So it has a certain effect on the mind. So again, being real about that, therefore, we should take these things into consideration.
And also come back to the original question about what things to ask when considering another partner. We also want to prioritize certain things which are more important and non-negotiable, and have other things which are more negotiable. For example, like the family situation, you know, if we are attached to a family, then we will need a partner who is also going to fit into that space. It'll be easier. So that's something which is more likely to be much more non-negotiable, possibly. And also, in terms of compatibility and value systems, that's also, to some extent, you may think that's non-negotiable, because there's only so much you can actually stretch to try to, you know, accommodate a partner who's got completely opposite interests. So that may be something you feel is much more non-negotiable.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, though, do the best you can, and always know that in any relationship, it is also an area of growth. So it's not that everything will be perfect, but if we're honest and we try our best, we can definitely improve the situation. We can work on things together. We can give and take. We can have realistic expectations as well of our partners. One thing that we often recommend, speak to people who are married. Right, when you know, and ask them, you know, so you know, what are their insights upon being married and so on, you know. It's a weird thing about society. If we're gonna be in a career, we will invest years, right? At least 4 years, university, college, whatever. But for relationships, we think it should just happen easily, you know. And I guess it's not to make it feel like it's work, but it's amazing if you can make a good endeavor. Don't make it too, like, don't make it feel overwhelming. Even sometimes friends and family can keep an eye out for you and so on, but understanding that you get out what you put in. I think that's the best way to put it. You'll get out what you put in. So if you're prepared to actually, let me just first step back and understand who I am, right? And then let me try and find someone who actually, you know, similar kind of, you know, goals and purpose and so on, and we move in that direction. And it's really a positive investment in your own future, and it can really, over time especially, it gets sweeter if it's done nicely like that. But there'll always be some give and take. It's not that everything will be perfect and it's just like you know, lying back. We want to put energy into that relationship, and we'll get out what we ultimately put in. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer as well. I think this question is also building off this too, and it says, how can we understand the outlines of relationships in the Vedas? For example, Mataji, you were speaking about how age is an important factor to consider, and I know that the Vedas say ideally a man should be older. I'm just wondering about how to practically apply the outlines of the Vedas.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That sometimes okay, I'm assuming that most of us are familiar with the Vedas, most of us on the call here, but just in case we're not, the Vedas is basically a system of knowledge which was recorded, written down several thousand years ago, originating from India. And basically, the Vedas deals with the principles of spirituality, but also principles of existence. Yes, it's a system of knowledge. So Vedas meaning knowledge. Yeah, so in the Vedas, there are so many different principles of relationship, even pastimes, stories that are in the Vedas. We're seeing relationships between personalities being acted out. So the principles of relationships are acted out in beautiful ways by the personalities in the Vedas. So this principle of age. So really, there's an underlying understanding here that for men in a relationship, what's really appreciated is a sense of deep appreciation, which is very much based upon kind of a respectful attitude. Now, it's not respect, not in a formal sense, not necessarily, but it's like a deep appreciation and in a sense that there's almost like a sense of, I don't know how to say, like almost like admiration, like you really, when you really appreciate, you really value someone or something, and you almost admire something about them. And so that's really appreciated by, I mean, everyone appreciates that, but when that's kind of expressed in a more external way, then that is appreciated by the man relationship. So, and so for females, they really appreciate a sense of feeling cared for and understood. So if the man in relationship is sensitive to her needs, and can, in one sense, try to support her in even her working towards fulfilling her own needs, then that's really appreciated by the female. And for the man, if the female is a sense of a really appreciation, almost a sense of admiring, then that's also really much valued. That's very much valued by the male in the relationship. So in the Vedas, it's explained that it's good if the female in the relationship is younger than the male. And the underlying principle behind that is because it's easier if the male's had a bit more life experience, but kind of like genuine life experience. He's really got something that he's got to share. He's really got something that he's realized or learned about life, and then he's in a much stronger position to try to support her in trying to fulfill her own needs. So that's the understanding behind the male being older than a female, is to really, it helps in be able to support her in her endeavor for her own needs and fulfilling her own needs and growth. And also it means that it's easier for her to have a sense of respect for appreciation for him.
Maybe I'll just add also that, so in the Vedas, it's explained that women tend to mature faster than men in relation to, in the area of relationships. You know, that they tend to, I mean, everything being equal, everyone's an individual, but it tends to be the case that they may be, I think the study was done, they showed men a group of pictures, and they asked them, can you guess the emotion? Can you actually work out what emotion this person's feeling in the picture? And they did the same with women. And they found that the women were better able to pick up how a person's feeling, right? So there's a consideration that they're more aware in the field of relationships. So what actually happens is that if the husband is more mature, so it's not that everything is strictly about age. That's a tendency, because it tends to be the case that if they're older, they have more life experience, and therefore there's more of a balance. It actually creates equality. That's what they're trying to do, but equality on a subtle level, equal or similar levels of maturity about relationships. Now you'll find this very interesting. You'll see that oftentimes men, when it comes to relationships, they haven't really thought so much about it. It's just like, oh, she looks nice, let's go and talk to her, right? But with the women, they tend to have had more reflection on what they're looking for in a relationship. So they have a more evolved understanding. So if they marry someone who's slightly older, or let's say the key thing is mature, that's the point, then it actually means that there's a similarity, because he's got a bit more of a clear idea of what he's looking for in a relationship. She's already had a clear idea, and therefore there's more of a meaningful exchange that goes on in that sense. So if they're the same age, it can still work if he and she are still on a similar level of maturity. So the whole thing about age is, the age isn't the thing itself. The age is to make sure that there's the right level of maturity. And again, just one thing to watch out for, because I've seen this happen, where people automatically assume that someone's mature. Why? Because you're attracted to them, you know? And so when you're attracted to someone, the tendency is to project all kinds of quality. Oh, you know, he's so funny, he's so intelligent, he's got such a great IQ.
And
well,
sometimes someone might say, oh, he's more mature than he appears, like more mature than his age group, for example. But generally people are as mature as their age group.
Yeah. But like I said, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's the key thing is the maturity. That's the essence of it.
Thank you so much. So the next question we have is there any advice for people who are in a relationship and have been for many years before marriage, but moving in together after marriage, having no experience living together. Is there any advice that you would have for people in that situation?
I think, can you say the question again? I didn't quite catch.
Sure. Sorry, it says, what is your advice on being in a relationship for many years before marriage, but moving in together after marriage, having no experience living together?
Do you want to answer that?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that sort of question before.
I can start if you want.
Yeah, you start now. Just
okay. And forgive me for doing this. I guess my advice wouldn't be so much about the situation, right? But my advice would be about the interactions. Okay. Again, being very, trying to offer a better quality of sharing. It's very, very powerful when people come together and they're committed. What happens in modern society, and it's kind of not spoken about so much, is that there are many people who are brokenhearted because they were together, they spent lots of time together, but they weren't committed to each other. So then, having lived in each other's space, etc., then they decide, oh, it's not going to work out. But what's not seen is how much that person is brokenhearted by giving so much time, energy, and especially if they're in a similar environment, a very strong emotional connection, and possibly even in other ways. And then it makes, if the person's brokenhearted, when they go to that next relationship, and I'm going to actually do this as a question. How many of you have seen this happen when a relationship fails and people go into another relationship, and now they're much more they're much more suspicious of whoever they're in a relationship with. They've got a lot more kind of trust issues because they were in a relationship before, maybe in the same space, and it ended badly, or it didn't lead into like a committed, let's say, a commitment in that sense. Use your reactions if you've known someone who's been in that particular space. I just want to see how many people can relate to what I'm about to say. Okay, I'm just looking around. Okay, I can see some, but there's loads. Yeah, all the time. So the thing to bear in mind here is this is one thing that we want to avoid. And the reason for this is also very subtle. If I do that, and because I kind of created this situation where I am in one sense taking the position of a committed partner, but I don't follow through to that commitment, leaving that person brokenhearted, I don't see, but that carries out into their future relationships. And because they are in some ways a little bit emotionally impacted by that, I will also be emotionally impacted at some future state in my own relationship because of that situation. So it's often, so I guess there's a note of caution here. And the note of caution is really think carefully about the commitment factor, and about taking a position where it's like we're now in a committed relationship, unless you are sure, at least that you're sure that you are going to take that commitment all the way through. It's interesting in some cultures, I guess maybe less in the modern age, but in some cultures and in traditional Vedic culture, it was seen that if a person was living in the same space as another person, if that didn't play out into a relationship, other people in that community would also think that they've actually been with someone, they've actually had a long-term relationship, and it then creates another perspective about their opportunities moving forward. I think you get the point. And I don't think that that's as much the case now, okay? But I guess there's a more subtle emotional factor that's often overlooked. And I think it's really, we often don't talk about it in society, but I think we need to have more of these conversations and say, look, what happened when that relationship broke up after the two living together, literally living in each other's space, literally as if they were a married couple, right? What happened either on the man's side or the woman's side? How are they now emotionally, right? And what baggage do they have? And what baggage are they potentially bringing to other relationships where now it's like, I was with this person and he or she, it didn't work out. Now the next person, I don't trust them so much. Are you going to say something that they said and then walk away later on? it's not just an investment of time and energy, it's actually an investment of the heart. It's an emotional investment. So I just put out some caution in that area.
Yeah, and so I would say to that, to things to consider if you're moving from the space of having been in a relationship, then you're getting married and living together. It's important to be aware that before marriage, you see the person when both of you are kind of at your best, in a sense of, you know, you pick a time, you meet up, maybe you're you're doing some sort of activity together, but in essence you're both seeing each other when it's to some extent convenient for either of you, and you're in a relatively good space. And then when you move to being married, that means that you're seeing each other at, you know, any time of the day when you're not necessarily so it's such a good space.
Yeah, like you don't see me in the morning, like hairs all over the place. It's not a pretty sight. She doesn't take pictures. She used to take pictures in the morning. We had to have some serious conversations about that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Just dropping that.
So I would say it's like being aware of that, and just having a sense of understanding that, and I guess a sense of enthusiasm, excitement, anticipation, like having that kind of mood of, okay, so we're going to develop our relationship more here. We're going to I'm going to find out more about my partner, like having a sort of a positive approach, or a positive kind of mood. But there will definitely be a shift from having been in a relationship where you're not living together to being married and then living together. Hopefully, both of you would have done enough in terms of understanding your own compatibility and your values. So, but if you do have slightly different value system and you're already in a very committed relationship, then when you're going to live together after you're married, then you want to have a sense of being aware of their value system. So you have to be a little bit more conscious. What is it that's really important to them, and trying to make more of an effort to incorporate that into how you both conduct yourselves in your same living space. So, for example, like, you know, if they are someone who is extremely tidy and really, really tidy, and like, you know, like, and you can tell because every single time you go like to their house, like, it always looks good. You don't have to give them like 4 hours notice. They suddenly, like, you know, clean up and tidy up everything before it looks good. Even if you pop by, you know, like 20 minutes before you see them, their room is still really tidy. It's always really tidy. So if they're a really tidy person and you're not such a tidy person, and then you're going to, you know, get married and live together, you may want to just start to sort of practice certain habits and certain things that you know that they all really value, that you're not so well rehearsed. And maybe you just want to try to incorporate that a little bit more into your routine, into your schedule, before you're married, and it'll be harder to pick up when you're actually married. But yeah, so I think that's it really, just being conscious of each other's values, having a sense of enthusiasm when you're going to get married, and just being aware as well that the relationship's going to shift such that you're not always dealing with each other when you're at your best.
I'll just add, I know quite a few people now who successfully have before they got married, they did some premarital counseling, and I thought it was very, very powerful. And the idea of premarital counseling is not like, oh, there's a problem, we need to fix them. Not at all. Premarital counseling, if it's done properly, done well, is all about, let's facilitate them having those honest conversations, right? Let's facilitate, like, you know, are you attached to this or that? What are your expectations? So you can have an honest conversation up front. So, and it can iron out many of the issues before the issues even arise. Because what happens when it gets into the point where it's like an argument, now there's a little bit of an emotional, you know, let's say an emotional withdrawal from the emotional bank account. Whereas if we would have that conversation up front, we could have come to a conclusion, an agreement, and it's something, and there'll have to be give and take, you know, absolutely. We could have come to something because we were honest up front and had those conversations. So we kind of, okay, I get where you're coming from. Is this negotiable? Is this something, because I'm thinking something different, and can really look at that. So that time and that space to do things up front and have those honest conversations, that's the thing that sets people up. If it's done honestly and done well and people follow through, it sets people up for a much better quality of relationship.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question we have is, what advice do you have if someone is in a relationship or they're married, but this commitment happened before spiritual life began, and the focus was completely different? How can they move forward with the commitment when one person wants to be strict in their spiritual life and the other person is not really placing an importance on it?
Yeah, you can say.
Yeah, okay, so let's say it's a committed marriage, okay? See, it's very interesting. There was one very powerful, spiritual, personality was making the point that with the marriage, you're marrying their character, right? So sometimes people may be more enthusiastic, less enthusiastic in terms of the direct spiritual life, but if there's good character, that's a big plus for a marriage. So what I would say is, and this is actually a principle that's across the board in all relationships, try to be inspirational in your example. Sometimes people make the mistake, it's like, I want to do this, you should do it as well. And it becomes more a tell. In this age, people don't care about, they actually don't care about spiritual life generally, right? Although they should, right? And some people do, but there's many who don't. But the trick is, and this is not, I guess trick is the wrong word. The point is, if you do it properly, it has such a powerful and inspiring effect. It really makes a big difference. We're not wasting our time if we try to be spiritual, because if it's done properly, we know that we gain something from it. It helps us to be better people, helps us to develop good character, so many things. So sometimes the key thing is to just continue to be a good example, not just in terms of your direct spiritual practices, but your character. That means caring, understanding, etc., etc. And when you do that and do that consistently, then it will help us to bring about the best situation that we can bring about based upon the person that we're dealing with, So sometimes when people become spiritual, let's say that they have family members who are not spiritual, they make the mistake of trying to just tell the family members, you need to change, I'm doing this, I'm not doing that anymore. That's the wrong approach, right? We should still follow properly, but we should try to do so in a way that shows that actually by me being a spiritual person, I'm able to be more kind, I'm able to be more caring, I'm able to be more understanding. The real communication is the example. That's the key point. And then when we do that, and often it requires patience, and it's something that happens over time, when we do that, we'll get the best situation that we can, given that the other person is also an individual in their own right, and they have their free will. And then we have to just work with the situation that we're in, if we really made that commitment in terms of marriage.
Yeah, and just as we as individuals were inspired to take up spiritual life by acting with consideration and care according to deep spiritual principles, by doing that, then we can also inspire our partner to also take to spiritual life. Ultimately, we want them to be attracted to spiritual life, and the best way we can inspire them to be attracted is by our own caring and considerate and compassionate example.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. The next question that we have is, are we all destined to find someone in life?
No, you're not. That was a short question. No, you're not. You're gonna be alone forever. Sorry, I'm just joking. We can edit that out.
We're all destined to find someone. Well, there is this kind of understanding of karma. So there's understanding of karma and free will. So yes, we have our free will at our disposal. We can desire in any particular kind of way. we can endeavor in a particular way, and then we get a certain result. And then that result that we attain, that becomes part of our situation. And then within that situation, within that context, we're desiring something else, we make another endeavor, and then something else comes to us. So this is the interplay between free will and between karma or reaction. So for example, you had the free will to maybe in a last, maybe in a another lifetime. For example, we had the desire for a partner, and we treated them in a particular kind of way. And then that means that we will face some kind of experience that comes out of the way we acted in that lifetime, and that experience may come to us in another lifetime. So there's this interplay between karma and free will. So it may be that, so therefore it's difficult to say that we're all guaranteed to find someone in every lifetime, every kind of in every kind of lifetime, because there are other things coming to us from previous lifetimes. But what we can do is we can just try, no matter what the situation is, as long as we have, we're striving, and we're trying to make the endeavor, no matter what the difficulty of the situation, we're trying to make the endeavor and trying to act, trying to act according to these high spiritual principles, trying to develop a deep, loving, spiritual consciousness, one of servitude. And that way it helps us to deal with any situation that comes. And also it helps us to, it helps us to, if we're living in a very spiritual, compassionate way, it will help us to also attract the right kind of partner into our lives, if that's something that we're due to experience due to karma from previous lifetimes. Yeah,
I would just emphasize, just do your best, and just be very practical. So for example, if you're looking, so the question is, are we destined to find a partner? The question is, well, depends on your endeavor. So are you doing what you need to be doing to find that particular partner? Are you clear on who you are and what your expectations are, right? Are you keeping an eye out? Are you maybe looking at different groups who may have the kind of person that you're looking for? Do your friends and family know that you're looking for someone so that they can keep an eye out for you? It's just to do the best you can, but try and do it wisely. Try and do it with guidance, with understanding, and then that things will really, really work out. And that guidance is also important. Sometimes a situation happens where there's a potential good match, but the person's unrealistic, and it's just like, oh, I want someone who, is like, a billionaire, and something's like, well, you don't really need the person to be a billionaire. You just need someone who's a good person, like that. But if the person has also, let's say, exaggerated or unreasonable expectations, and they're just fixed on that, then that can also be an issue. Because then what happens, I remember the story about this, there was some man who was drowning, or I think there was a fire, or he was stranded, he was going to die. And, a speedboat came on the island and said, I'll come to help you. He said, no, it's okay, I'm praying to God to save me. And then a helicopter came and said, you can come with us. Said, no, I'm praying to God to save me. Anyway, he died. And when in the story, he goes to the kingdom of God and he said, God, I was praying to you. Why did you say? He said, God said, look, I sent you the speedboat, I sent you the helicopter, but you didn't take any of the options I sent you. So, what can I do? So the point is that sometimes opportunities will come, but we don't take the opportunities because we don't evaluate things properly. So that's the other thing I'd say, is just be grounded. And that's why also another pair of eyes can be good. And it could even just be bouncing things off your friends, relatives, people who are mature ideally, and also have your best interests at heart. That can really help.
And also as well, if even if something is part of, let's say, part of one's destiny, for example, if you feel something, but still one actually has to make the endeavor for the results to come. So you still have to make the endeavor for that result to come. So in any case, endeavor is always the primary factor. The only thing that we can actually change in the situation is our endeavor. The result is not down to us. So that's the only part we really need to be concerned about, actually.
Thank you so much, Prabhu and Mataji. I know it's 7 o'clock already. Is it okay if we run about 5 or 10 minutes over the two of you. Is that okay? We've got a lot of questions still, so we might have to save some and hopefully do a part 2.
Yeah, you can go over, but it'll cost you.
Okay, team, it's going to cost us.
Your bank details in the chat. I have a PayPal account.
Perfect. The team's on it. Anki, I hope you're listening to this.
Transferring now.
Yeah.
The next question we have, it says, I've noticed that the topic about showing affection or intimacy is a taboo subject in our community. However, it is a big part of a relationship. What are your thoughts and advice on this?
Don't do it. No, just joking. I was just joking.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Something that's actually because I've noticed that it's kind of it's shifted a bit. So so now there's more expressions of affection, like online, for example, and then that's kind of becomes like the norm in one sense. Expressing affection in relationships. So affection, it definitely is helpful. It should be there. That expression of affection, you know, it's a way of expressing our love, our concern, our care for people. So it is something that should be there. I think if you ask different people, they answer this question different ways. What I would say is that personally, like it's something which is quite special to the relationship, and sometimes it's difficult if really dramatic affectionate things are done in a public way, because actually it's something that's between the two of you. It's actually something that's quite intimate and unique to your relationship, and so it doesn't really need to be done in a public way. Sometimes it's appropriate, or something's natural, like some people getting married. Then you'll see at the wedding there'll be an expression of affection between the two people, and that's completely understood. That's part of the culture even, and the whole community gets together and encourages the people and gives their blessings, so that the two people really form that commitment on so many different levels at the wedding ceremony. But generally, expressions of affection is something which is unique to the two of you, and therefore doesn't really need to be displayed so much. That's what I would say.
Okay, so I'll just add. I'll just add. So I guess the one other thing I'd say to that, and I think that's I completely appreciate that point, is that also there are many different ways in which affection can be expressed. I know that there's one book that was really, I think it's still really popular. I think it's about the love languages. I've not read it, but the principle behind it, that people experience affection in different ways. That's really interesting. I think also, see, this is interesting. Ultimately, what we're really looking for is a deep, loving connection, right? So what is affection? Affection is, I want to feel that I've got a deep, real connection with someone. And not pushing it because it's my Spiritual Mentors book, but if you want to get into this topic a lot more, Spiritual Warrior 2 really gets into this. And one of the points which are made there is that often if people don't have a real deep heart-to-heart connection, the only way that they can find to feel that they're close to someone is it has to become very physical. And I'm not saying that affection has to be physical. I'm just giving this as one example. So I'd say there's a couple of things. One is, yes, affection is natural. In fact, there's a purport where Prabhupada said these things can't be stopped. It's just it has to be expressed, you know, in the right way or in the right connection. So I'd say affection is natural. We're made for love, right? But we have to understand what is it, what is affection, what is love? How do we express it in such a way that it actually really enhances a relationship? It allows us to grow. And there's different ways to express affection. We can express affection through kind words. By doing something for someone, we can express affection just by having very kind of deep exchanges, intimate exchanges in a kind of very loving and very, let's say, in a very healthy way. So there's a dimension in which it's something that's between the individuals, them understanding what that means to each other and so on. And there's also the principle that if we're trying to have healthy relationships, and we're having that mood that we want to help each other to grow, it will automatically bring a great deal of affection, kind words, encouragement, appreciation, you know, doing things for one another. All of these things are very powerful ways. And it's interesting because when we have a wider range of expressions of affection, then you find that you get a deeper satisfaction in the relationship, right? The modern world sometimes tries to give the impression that it has to be just physical or there's no affection. But actually, that can be a good, healthy part of it in a healthy, committed, ideally marriage relationship. But it's not the only way that affection can be expressed. So I'll just say that.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we
also love your hugs.
We love your hugs as well.
I think we are going to have one last question. And hopefully we are going to save all the questions that everybody has sent us so far. And hopefully we can bring Madhujin probably back for a part 2. The last question that I have here on my list today says, how can we overcome insecurities from a controlling relationship / what is the best way to move on from an unhealthy relationship?
Yeah, this is such a great question. Insecurities, yes, those insecurities will generally come from when we may not be aware of our own like kind of unique identity, our own unique attributes. We've not really accepted our own unique attributes, and we may feel so insecure. It may also come from previous experiences that we've had where we don't feel like we're good enough, our values are strong enough to contribute to a particular situation, to a particular partnership. And generally when we're not in such a secure place, then it's very difficult for us to be at our best in relationships. It's very difficult. And then again, if we're also with someone who acts towards us in a certain way, they can also actually undermine our sense of self-worth or self-value, and that can also encourage us to feel more insecure and not at our best. So if we're in that kind of situation, it's kind of difficult to speak about it in a very general sense because there will be so many particulars to that situation. But what I say it's really important that we have to generate a sense of self-acceptance, self-worth, self-value. That's really, really primary. Actually, that's primary whether we're in a relationship or not. Actually, we should be generating a sense of self-worth, self-acceptance, and self-value. So we should be trying to understand, who am I as a person? What are my inclinations? What am I enthusiastic about? What helps me to be nourished in life? And we should be trying to incorporate those kinds of things in our lives in a day-to-day. So we're feeling nourished. We're really working on things that we value. And it also depends on the other person, if they're being controlling and they're kind of triggering us. It also kind of depends, like, are they just going through a difficult time? In which case, maybe are they feeling agitated, and is it a sense, are they being more controlling because they're just very stressed or very anxious? Is it due to something which is very temporary and they're not usually like that? In which case, if that is the case, we may want to tell the partner, you may try and communicate in a very positive way and say, I know you have the best intention at heart. At the same time, I find your behavior to be quite controlling. Is there and then we may want to use it as an opportunity to talk to them, to try and offer them that support so that they can actually they can feel more, maybe more supported, and it can help them to feel a little bit more in a space where they can maybe talk about the issues, and in that way we can help them to come to a place of balance. So you can say, I'm noticing that you're a bit more, the way you're treating me, I find it's a little bit controlling in a way. I know you mean the best. Is there something that's bothering you? Is there something you'd like to talk about? Is there some way that I could? Is there something that's going on? But if it's a consistent feature and the person's consistently like that, then it also depends. I mean, it's difficult to say, because are you married with children? because then that's really something. Then it's not as simple as just maybe walking out of that situation. You may want to see how you can manage that situation. Are there things that that you can do to encourage the other person to feel much more secure in themselves? Do they express their insecurities less? Which is, and a way of expressing insecurity is to be a bit controlling. Controlling people are actually insecure. So you know, if you maybe they're frustrated because they're in a work situation which really doesn't suit their nature, and they're always being you know, rained down on by their boss, and then maybe you can encourage them to take up activities which they can express their nature, and that way they feel more secure. So I said lots of things. I feel there's a lot of things which could be going on in that kind of situation. So I really hope that's helpful.
Yes, I'll just say, just the question is why, right? So they're overly controlling. Why? Is it because were they always like this, etc.?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to discuss it with a friend to get another perspective, and then based upon why, then you can actually determine. It's actually based upon why, and based upon the relationship, then that helps you to determine how to address it. And that's about the overly controlling. And in terms of insecurity, so everyone has some insecurities, first of all, right? But the more that we actually look after ourselves, the more that we treat ourselves in a way that's actually showing ourselves actually you're valuable and you're valued, the less the insecurities will actually affect us. So that's the key principle. We did a podcast on this actually. So to get into more detail, because we haven't got so much time now, but there is a podcast, and I'll put the name here, and you can look this up, because this is exactly why we did it. So we could have more of a deep dive, and it's called the Edenova Podcast. And both myself and Bhakti Gamya, we're speaking about the self-esteem spectrum, and that's what it's called, self-esteem spectrum.
And this podcast is available on basically like all podcast platforms. Basically.
Yeah. So it goes into more detail. Actually, it was a model that Bhakti Gamya came up with, and it talks about excessive self-esteem, where, you know, people are overly controlling, domineering, lack of self-esteem, where people may be overly submissive, and healthy self-esteem, where there's a healthy space for ourselves and healthy space for other people. So I think that's probably the best we can do in terms of giving people more material on that topic at this time.
And I would also say as well, I mean, sometimes people who are controlling, sometimes they're actually just being opportunistic. Because if one person's kind of has a tendency towards being submissive, sometimes people are controlling just because they see, oh, this person tends to be submissive. Okay, then I will control the situation. Some people are controlling and they feel like, you know, that sometimes they want to push the other person around. Sometimes they actually think they're trying to help the other person because the other person doesn't seem to be able to make decisions for themselves so much. So, so that's also something to take into account. Like it's always the case that we can always strive to develop ourselves, improve ourselves, you know, take shelter, take guidance. And it's always a case that in a situation that there's always something that we can do to try to better that situation. So even if someone else is controlling, we can maybe learn, okay, how can I take more responsibility for my situation? How can I start to direct the kind of discussions that I'm having with my partner? So we may feel like, oh, that person's just very, very controlling, but maybe there's a space for us to also learn to be a bit more self-directive as well. So those two things can always be in balance. So yes, what's the other person doing? But also, what can I do to try to improve this situation?